was that the Conservatives would indeed find that the electoral system is not very favourable to them, and therefore, as a result, they would fall short of the 326 mark. What, of course, we didn't anticipate was that necessarily the arithmetic would work out just like this, such that, in fact, it's not clear that the Conservatives can command the confidence of the House of Commons in the absence of some understanding with the Liberal Democrats. The truth is that the number of votes that the Conservatives have together with the DUP and perhaps an independent unionist in Fermanagh looks too few for them to be sure, given that it's perfectly possible that Labour, the Liberal Democrats, the Nationalists, the Green MP who's been elected, the SDLP MPs and the New Alliance MP in Northern Ireland might potentially all be willing to vote against a Conservative administration, and equally might be willing to support a Labour and Liberal Democrat one. So I think the truth is Mr Cameron is finding himself, annoyingly from his point of view, just too few vote seats short of being in a position where he can avoid picking up the phone to Mr Clegg.
And what about the SNP? I see Alex Salmond has declared that fate has dealt the SNP a mighty hand.
It has potentially. I mean, certainly if it were to be true that the Liberal Democrats were to throw their lot in with the Labour Party, they jointly would still be a few seats short, even taking into account their Northern Ireland allies, and the balance of power would in effect lie with the Nationalists. And certainly any such administration would need to have some understanding from the Nationalists as to what would be the price of their support, or at least their abstention, in any Queen's speech. So yes, the truth is, although neither Plaid nor the SNP achieved their ambitions in terms of winning seats at Westminster, as fate would have it, the arithmetic has worked out that potentially, so I say only potentially, they could be in a strong position. On the other hand, if Mr Clegg in the end does come to some understanding with Mr Cameron, then the Nationalists will not be able to do anything about it at all.
Now, you're not going to like this, John, but what's your money on?
Well, I think the truth is it's now very much in Mr Cameron's court, and the question is whether or not Mr Cameron is willing and able to make some kind of offer on the electoral system to Mr Clegg that might enable Mr Clegg to persuade his parliamentary party to give the Conservatives at least an understanding that they would not vote against them in a Queen's speech. That's going to be quite a difficult ask for the Tory leader, and I don't think, therefore, we should necessarily presume that the negotiations between the Tories and the Democrats will succeed, and we might, therefore, still see that subsequently there are attempts between the Labour Party. Of course, we'll now partly see how Gordon Brown's going to play it, but certainly everything we've heard from the Labour Party so far seems to be that Gordon Brown is going to stay there until it is clear that there is an alternative administration that would ensure that he would be voted out of office. OK, John Curtis, thank you very much for that. Douglas Fraser, what do you make of it all?
Well, we're in completely uncharted territory. It helps to know a little bit about what happens on the continent in terms of putting together coalitions, because there it can take an average of about 40 days in order to get a coalition put together. Bear in mind that the markets are bearing down on the new administration. They'll probably give them today and the weekend, but by Monday morning they're going to need a bit of certainty at a time of a lot of jitters within
Douglas, we problem with your microphone. While they're sorting that out, let me just go to John Park, who never got a quick comment from you, John. I mean, is the country going to buy it if it does end up that Gordon Brown stays in power with the Lib Dems?
I think I'd have a very short political career if I was going to preempt what Gordon Brown was going to say just now. But I think the situation we're going to get into is one where I believe Gordon Brown will do what's right for the country. And I think we'll see public opinion crystallise very quickly as the parties start to talk to each other over the next few hours and certainly over the next day.
Well, we may have to go to Downing Street very shortly as we wait for Gordon Brown. But Douglas Fraser, what about Scotland and this big question now with the Conservatives? One seat in Scotland and yet possibly, governing the UK. Where does that leave Scotland?
Well, it leaves the Tories under constant pressure, particularly from the SNP. It's hinted at also by some folk within Labour that they do not have a mandate in Scotland. The Labour Party is now presenting itself as the party that is protecting Scotland against the potential for a Conservative government at Westminster. But then if you get the SNP doing some kind of deal, not coalition clearly, but some kind of deal to support a Labour-led administration, whether or not it's a Gordon Brown-led administration, then the politics of the next Holyrood election, these guys are obviously looking to that, is less than a year now, become really interesting. Indeed, if you look at the politics of what's happening at Westminster, they may be back into another election. There's talk already of David Cameron looking to a better mandate and maybe the start of May next year might be a good time for him to plan on it.
But where did the Conservatives go wrong? I mean, this seems to be mystifying everybody that they didn't do better than they did.
I think they're still fighting an old legacy. They're still fighting the ghost of Margaret Thatcher in Scotland. That's clearly a problem for them. Labour was very effective in being able to set up the Tories, David Cameron, as a bogeyman, a return to the bad old days as it's presented, and managed to harvest a lot of votes away from the SNP, away from Lib Dems to Labour by setting up the Tories that way. Also, I think there may have been a mistake made by the Conservatives in the way they ran their campaign in Scotland, was a kick-out Gordon Brown message. What actually turned out was there was a fair amount of sympathy for Gordon Brown when he came under attack. This has happened before. The Scots, they may not be desperately fond of Gordon Brown, but they will rally to him when he comes under that kind of insulting pressure, if you want.
OK, Douglas, thank you for that. We can go over now to Edinburgh and our correspondent Raymond Buchanan. What are your reflections this morning after